Hello, and welcome back to the Odious Soul. This video is going to be about Fenn giving us the answer to the third clue. Now, this video is also going to cover a whole lot of other things based around Fenn giving us the third clue, and how you interpret his answer to the third clue. So we're going to start back in 2013. It was an epic year for the Forrest Fenn treasure hunt. A lot more media attention was going on, and Fenn was appearing on shows like The Today Show. Fenn first appeared on The Today Show February 27th of 2013. There, he talked about the treasure hunt, he talked about the poem, and they also announced that he would be giving more clues to where the treasure is, or shall I say is not, on this broadcast. On March 1st, the clue was announced: the treasure is hidden higher than 5,000 feet above sea level. On March 27, 2013, the clue came out: the treasure is not associated with any structure. May 3rd, the treasure is not in a graveyard. Let's see here. And in June 28th, the treasure is not hidden in Idaho or Utah. Now, what were some of these extra clues really about? Why did Fenn feel the need to put out extra clues for this treasure hunt? Well, for lots of reasons. For one, there were people going all over the place, digging up on national forests. People were trespassing on private property. People were disturbing things like graveyards. There were so many reasons why Fenn needed to put out extra clues. You know, the public, a lot of officials were wanting him to call off the search. They were concerned about this. People were getting in trouble. And I also believe that Fenn kind of felt in 2013 that he needed to do something to get this treasure found, or at least to help put people on the right track. I know other searchers sometimes feel like anything that came out, after or from like the point that Too Far to Walk was published and on, kind of is just media hype and shouldn't really be paid attention to. But I kind of disagree. I find that Fenn felt he had a moral obligation to help people find this treasure. And I believe when he published Too Far to Walk in 2013, September, that part of the reason why he published this book was to help get people on the right track to finding this treasure. If you know, in the thrill of the chase, Fenn put out the poem. This is 2010. He released the poem. He has a bunch of stories about his childhood. He talks about the war. And you kind of get a glimpse of who Fenn is. And really, the only thing he had said is that, he hid this treasure somewhere out there in the Rocky Mountains, north of Santa Fe. That's really all he had said at that point. And then let people go loose. So people drew their own conclusions, and people had their search areas. And I think by 2013, Fenn started to know some of these treasure hunters. I think he built personal relationships with some of these treasure hunters. I feel like he felt bad because people were out there spending money to go look for this treasure. They were committing, so much time and energy and they were so far off of where he had hid this treasure. So I personally, and of course, with this treasure hunt, nobody knows where this treasure is, okay? It's out there. Nobody's found it. And everybody has an opinion. And if you assume anything, you know what that does, okay? So, but in my opinion, in my honest opinion, I believe that the 2013 book, Too Far to Walk, as well as everything else that he put out that year, was to help searchers get closer to that treasure chest without giving an exact location or a specific place that we should be looking. So again, September 2013, Too Far to Walk comes out. In November of that year, he has the Moby Dickens interview. If you have not seen that video, please go to A Gypsy's Kiss on YouTube. There is an amazing video Toby recorded Fenn speaking at that Moby Dickens bookshop that day, and I think it's one of the most real, honest interviews that Fenn does. I know it's the one that I tend to gravitate to the most, where I love his answers, I love his personality, I love how he speaks, and I think you get a really good idea of who he is, and I think you can get some really good, valid hints as to where the treasure is in that video. So, let's go into Too Far to Walk. You know, it was funny. It's Mother's Day. I'm recording this on Mother's Day. And I was downstairs eating my Mother's Day breakfast that my 15-year-old daughter made for me. And I had the Too Far to Walk book on the table. And I was currently Googling some notes, some things that I had questions to and wanted answers for. And she's like, why isn't that title capitalized? Out of the mouths of babes, okay? I never really paid much attention to that Too Far to Walk was not capitalized. It's all lowercase. And I was like, wow, that's a really good thing to point out. Also, if you look in the poem, you know, there is that line, not far, comma, but too far to walk. And Too Far to Walk is not capitalized in the poem. So that just leads us right into the preface. All right, so the preface of the book is quite interesting. Fenn, in the preface of Too Far to Walk, talks about how he didn't have time or enough pages to put in all the stories he wanted to. There were so many more tales he could have told. And I'm going to read the last part of the preface here. It starts off like this. Praise and thanks must go to my wife, Peggy, who for 67 years has quietly helped me through my life. It was in 1946 when we started dating in high school. She has been a wonderful traveling companion, and she always understood when I needed space, which reminds me of a trip I took many years ago. I put a small rubber dinghy in the Madison River, a few miles from West Yellowstone, Montana, and fished downstream to Baker's Hole. That part of the river was in the quietly forgotten western edge of Yellowstone Park. There were no roads, no trails, and no rangers to remind me that I wasn't supposed to do that. The river distance was about 10 miles, and the best fishing was in the bends where the water turned greenish deep and beautiful. The small boat containing my camping gear was tethered to my belt as I leisurely walked in the quiet river. I spent 3 days there, casually casting my fly and enjoying the solitude. The river experience cemented my connection to that special country. I want to put words in his mouth. And I promised myself that someday I would make that trip again. That day has never came for me, and my disappointment still cast a lonesome shadow across the Madison River. For me now, it's just too far to walk. Boy, isn't that an epic beginning to a book? Isn't that some words that we should be paying attention to? He says that 10 river miles is just too far to walk. So, what do we think? Do we think that A, he is telling us that 10 river miles is how far that clue Too Far to Walk is, and it can pertain to anywhere in the Rocky Mountains, wherever we actually believe warm water is salt? Or is he actually saying that that stretch of the river is the answer to the third clue in the poem? Assuming that you think that Too Far to Walk is the third clue in the poem. So, that's food for thought to start off the rest of the book. So, in chapter 4, the chapter is entitled Buffalo Smoke, and it talks about fishing in Yellowstone Park on the bank of the Madison River. Again, we've just started the book. We're only on chapter 4, and he's mentioned the Madison River now twice. What's very interesting here is he does not capitalize buffalo. Every time he says buffalo in his chapter, it is not capitalized. So please note this for discussion of later chapters. Okay, but he talks about being on the banks. You know, there were this herd of buffalo, and he wouldn't have even known they were there. Like, they were just so quiet. They didn't care what he was doing, and he might have missed that moment to really actually enjoy what was actually happening. The next chapter that really stood out to me in this book was chapter 5. Right after Buffalo Smoke, we go to chapter 5, River Bathing is Best. And apparently I'm having a hard time talking today. So, In Chapter 5, River Bathing is Best, Fenn talks about bathing in the Firehole River. A little hot spring comes out on top of this ground. It goes down this bank into the water, and he can control the temperature that he's bathing in depending on how close or how far away he is from the banks. And he talks about how it's like 20 miles from town. And he rides his bike there to take a bath because he prefers bathing in the river in the solitude of nature as opposed to bathing in the center of their cabin with his mom pouring water over his naked body. Okay, so now searching, and I was recently at this place, or traveled, the roads from West Yellowstone to where he's speaking, and it takes about an hour to drive there, due to speed limits in the park, as well as the occasional wildlife encounter, and the different tourists that like to slow down and look at everything. So, and that's by car. So if he's riding a bike, how long would it have taken him to really get there? Plus, some of this roadway is also an incline. So, we all know Fenn was in good shape. He was young, he was spry, he was adventurous. But seriously, how long do you think it probably took him to ride that bike? Probably, best case, maybe 2.5 hours, maybe 3. Give or take. And then you got to think of him enjoying his bath. He talks about being in there and using the green river grass, sometimes taking a handful of it to help wash his body as a washcloth. And then you got to think about him coming home. Now, I would assume in the summertime, by the time he got back to West Yellowstone, he was probably just as sweaty and dirty as he was when he got there when he got done, got to the bathing hole. So to me, I think it's kind of funny that you travel 20 miles for a bath, and probably by the time you get back, you're just as dirty and sweaty and in need of a bath as when you started. So it kind of makes me question, how often did he actually do this? How frequent did he do this? Was this just once or twice, or did he do it all the time? And if so, what is the relevance of this chapter in the book? It's of course a fond memory, but again, what is the relevance of him throwing in a story about bathing in the Firehole River? That's something that you got to think about. So, one of the things I will say here at the end of this chapter, he does talk about that green river grass, swaying and the flow of the water. And he also talks about his daughter, Kelly, when she was curling her hair with her finger. Sometimes it's like this long, golden blonde hair, how it would remind him of that green river grass and take him back to those times. So it points out how special of a place this was to him and how great of a memory that bathing in the fire hole was. So let's try to throw that in there too. So after the chapter, Bathing in the River, he then talks about a friend, Bill Fike, and then we go on to chapter 7, his trip to Yellowstone's Grebe Lake, and I hope I'm saying that right. To anybody who I said that wrong, I do apologize, with his high school football coach, Concy. Concy was in the early stages of Parkinson's, and this was actually the final fishing trip that they had taken together. And it's kind of funny because it talks about the journey. It's about a 3-mile walk from the road, from where they parked their car, and how they had this VIP pass them, in this black limousine, and how when they woke up the next morning, that limousine had 2 flat tires. He doesn't say it in the book, but it kind of sounds almost like maybe Fenn and Concy were the reason they had the 2 flat tires. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But it definitely leaves you to question that possibly, that's the case. Just gonna say. But immediately after chapter 7 and before we get to chapter 8, we meet Fenn's granddaughter, Luca. I'm assuming it's how you say her name, Luca Sparks. What's really kind of fun about this is it talks about her being the fisherwoman of the family and how great she was. She ties her own flies. And in the first chapter on that page, the first section of words on that page, he does not capitalize the word trout. Okay? But at the bottom of the page, when he talks about how he took, you can capture that she made the flies at the bottom of the page, and he used them to go fishing in Grayling Creek, which is right outside of West Yellowstone, in Montana. And he does capitalize Loch Leven. Now, Loch Leven is a subspecies of brown trout. So I think it's very interesting that when he talks about an animal in general, like buffalo or trout, he does not capitalize it. But when he talks about a specific kind of animal, such as Loch Leven, he does capitalize that. So, and this is not the only time in the book where you can notice that happening. Chapter 16. We move on. Chapter 16 was about Cactus Cowboys. Nothing really in the story here that really caught me. However, behind the picture, you will see words. And the words from that story are actually from The Thrill of the Chase, when Fenn and Donnie went out and got lost in the wilderness. Their little trek on horseback and wandering through, the Gallatin National Forest and kind of getting lost. And then finding their way back out, of course. But so I just wanted to point that out and kind of have you take note to that chapter was kind of highlighted here behind the picture. Chapter 19, story of the Dude, okay? The Dude is a chapter about how in 1962, Fenn's brother Skippy talks him into helping him build a hotel in West Yellowstone, and they end up naming it The Dude, okay? And it has a cute story about how Ronald Reagan stayed there in room number 4. He lost his key one night, and he actually had to climb through a window to get into his hotel room, and that made the Los Angeles Times, and how the Dude became famous because of this. And he also talks about how every time he goes back to West Yellowstone, he tries to stay at the Dude in room number 4. Now, this is very important because some people feel, because of what Fenn has said in the past, that he has not returned to West Yellowstone since he was a kid, or since he was like 19, somewhere around there, a long time. But it's not true. Fenn has returned to West Yellowstone. He has just not spent the entire summer in West Yellowstone like he had done when he was younger. So that's very important to note that in this chapter, he notes that he does go back, he has gone back. And obviously, if he fished in Grayling Creek with his granddaughter's flies that she tied, obviously he had been back to that area. His granddaughter, of course, I'm sure was born a lot later than 1962. So just to show you the timeline, that he has kept returning to that area for various reasons, some of them unknown to us, but still he has been back there. Chapter 8. Ode to Joe. And Joe was somebody he had met in 1974, and in this chapter, it's kind of like, just remembering him and his, in his memory, he's now passed. But in that chapter, you'll find a picture of Peggy, Fenn, and Joe on the Gallatin River. Of course, not far between West Yellowstone and, it's like Gallatin River, is right there, between Bozeman and West Yellowstone. So obviously, again, showing that he's been back to that area since he was a kid. So just, and you can tell by the picture that Peggy and Fenn are not like young and spry. They definitely look a little bit older and wiser in this picture. So, chapter 37, moving right along. This chapter is very interesting as well. At the end of this chapter, he capitalizes another creature, the lest chipmunk. Okay, so I found that was very interesting. In this, he also talks about Montana and the National Forest. So if you just give me a second, I'm actually going to read a section from this chapter for you. I know you love it when I read to you. This is the last little bit. When a sound breaks the calm of the canyon, I know it's something important and I quickly turn. Maybe it's a squirrel whose tail is beating a rapid cadence that lets all creatures know that he's been aroused by a visible danger. He doesn't want to be mean, but I think he wants to look like he could be. Perhaps a tepid black bear has topped the hill, or an unreasonable barn owl is on the hunt. Sitting quietly can bring many smiling rewards. Perhaps an aptly named least chipmunk, whose size might make you think he's one of nature's afterthoughts, will scamper into view and scurry around hiding berries and nuts for winter. When the snow falls deeply, he'll go into a state of torpor, but he will not hibernate. Isn't that interesting? There is so much to learn. And I know there are costs. Every Montana evening, when I squashed a mosquito on my arm, 15 of his relatives came to the funeral. But the rewards of traipsing through the hills and the canyon bottoms are winner-take-all proof of personal fulfillment for me. If some of my friends think I am wrong, to be a distant dreamer, vaguely disinterested in many of life's modern habits, they could be correct. But wrong is one of those concepts that depends on witnesses, and that's why I'm always right when I'm alone in the mountains. I'll happily share my national forest with you, but please try to stay at least 20 miles away. So, again, a very interesting chapter. He capitalizes the animal name, all right? He's not just saying chipmunk, he's mentioning the type of chipmunk, and you see him capitalize those words because of it. He's also mentioning Montana and the mountains and talking about national forest. He doesn't mention national parks. He specifically mentions national forest here, which I found kind of interesting and motivating. So, more food for thought. So moving along, let's talk about Chapter 39. Chapter 39 is called Heading North, and it talks about how Fenn would just get in an airplane and start heading north. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know where he was landing, and it really didn't care for at least 600 miles. I think this is really important to note because he does mention Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, but he is just talking about heading north into the Rockies, and sometimes he wouldn't have to think about where to land for at least 600 feet. I know Fenn has said that the treasure is at least 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, but maybe searchers need to make sure they're looking at least 600 miles north of Santa Fe. There must be a reason why he said 600. So, or maybe not. All right, he does talk about once he stopped in Lander, Wyoming, all right, and then he also talks about heading up to Cody, Wyoming, to the Buffalo Bill Center, where he later became part of that organization and did a lot of fundraising and help in that area. So just interesting places to note where he's talked about where he's visited and some of the feelings that he has behind that. The next chapter, chapter 40, is called Charmé and Me. This chapter is actually about his time at San Lazaro with his friend Charmé. And it also talks about removing a flagstone jar from the corner of a pueblo there and what they found when they did. They found a hole in the ground. They found, jars containing seeds and, could this be how Forrest hid the treasure? Is it in a wholesome place? Is it under a rock or a lid somewhere? One may never find out. So moving on, in chapter 46, it's called RIP, R.I.P., and it's about Forrest Fenn going through southwestern Wyoming through the desert, the desert dunes, sand dunes out there, and he comes across a cemetery, and there is this fallen gravestone marker, and he writes it. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about this picture because the grave marker looks, it doesn't look like it's 100 years old. It looks really white. It looks kind of new. You can still easily read what's on it. It's kind of curious. But I did just want to point out, that he does talk about how at the very end, Elmer and I had been walking across the sand dunes of southwestern Wyoming when we happened upon this remote spot on a small rise. There was nothing but raw nature for miles in every direction. We thought it was a special place to be buried. I know Mary is resting in peace. Again, just some food for thought. All right, so the rest of this book that I have not mentioned contains various stories. It contains stories of various people, various friends Fenn has had along the way. It talks about his family. It talks about Peggy. There are just a mixed match of stories from all over the place. Stories from Arizona, stories from Florida, just all different kind of things, you know, in this. And of course, I pulled out most of the things that contain to Montana, Wyoming, that Yellowstone area, because he does keep talking about it. And just the fact that he mentioned it in the preface was very stand-outish to me. I can't help that. It just stood out. His mind constantly drifts back to that area. And from some of these stories and the information in this book, he has continually gone back to that area. It isn't a place where he's avoided, even though he's gotten older and lives farther away. He still has gone back. So I can't help but think it's farther up north than it is down south. But again, that's my opinion. Those are my conclusions. And in this treasure hunt, everybody has their own opinions and conclusions. There are probably thousands of different solves for this poem. Now, in the very back of Too Far to Walk, you will find the map and the map has the poem on it, and it does have different lands differentiated on there. And Fenn has talked a little bit about, you know, property rights of different lands, and how he's sure that wherever somebody finds this treasure, there's going to be no question who it belongs to. So that is a topic for a whole nother video. So I want to say thank you so much for watching me today, and please take time to like this video, to subscribe to my channel, and to also share it with any of your fellow Forest Fenn treasure hunting buddies, okay? The support you guys have given me so far has been absolutely amazing, and I truly appreciate it. In the comments, please be sure to let me know what other topics you would like for future videos. Please let me know your opinion of the Too Far to Walk book. Please let me know what kind of things you have pulled from this book, or if you even consider what is in Too Far to Walk for your search. So again, thank you guys so much. Have a great day. And to all the mothers, happy Mother's Day.